Nathan Carter returned home after a long day of work, the sound of the heavy wooden door closing with a sharp hollow thud. The dim light of the house only added to the suffocating silence that greeted him. The living room light was on, but there was no sign of life. No music playing softly as Madeline often enjoyed. No sound of his daughter Lila's footsteps rushing to greet him. Nathan's heart tightened, an unshakable sense of unease rising in his chest. He stepped into the kitchen where the soft yellow glow of the overhead light illuminated a scene that felt oddly staged. On the dining table sat an opened bottle of wine, nearly half empty, with a single glass poured but untouched. Beside it lay a small piece of paper, the neat, deliberate handwriting of Madeline unmistakable. "We need to talk." Just 4 simple words, but they weighed like boulders pressing against Nathan's chest. The echo of his footsteps followed him as he ascended the wooden stairs. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, the faintest sliver of light spilling into the hallway. He pushed the door open gently, and the sight that greeted him stopped him cold. Madeline was sitting at her vanity, her back turned to him. She was dressed in a black form-fitting dress, her curly hair cascading over her shoulders. But there was nothing soft or familiar about her tonight. In the mirror's reflection, Nathan saw her face, a cold, resolute expression as if she had already made up her mind. She looked like a stranger. "You're home," she said, her voice calm yet carrying an undertone of iciness that sent chills down Nathan's spine. "Madeline, what's going on?" Nathan asked, his voice catching in his throat. Madeline turned to face him, her eyes avoiding his as she gazed down at her hands. Slowly, deliberately, she slid off her wedding ring, its golden gleam dulled under the harsh light. She set it on the wooden surface of the vanity, the soft clink echoing louder than it should have in the heavy silence. "I want a divorce," she said. Each word hit Nathan like a blade, slicing deeper with every syllable. He stood frozen, his eyes locked on the ring now lying motionless on the table. "A divorce?" he stammered, his voice trembling as he struggled to suppress the rising lump in his throat. "Why?" "We're fine, Madeline. Don't tell me—" "No, Nathan," she interrupted, her voice sharp as she finally met his gaze. Her eyes were devoid of emotion, like 2 cold, distant stars. "We're not fine. I don't love you anymore. I found someone else." The room seemed to spin. Nathan felt his legs falter, forcing him to grip the edge of the dresser to keep himself upright. "Someone else?" he repeated, disbelief thick in his voice. Who? Who is it?" Madeline didn't answer immediately. She stood, her movements deliberate, and walked a few steps toward the window. The room seemed frozen in time, every second dragging painfully. Finally, she turned to him, her voice steady and unyielding. "James Monroe. I love him, Nathan. He gives me what you never could." The name struck him like a punch to the gut. James Monroe. A name he had never heard before, but one that now symbolized betrayal, the destruction of 2 decades of life, love, and trust. "Madeline?" Nathan's voice cracked as he tried to form words, but they seemed to evaporate in the air. "What about Lila? Have you thought about her?" "Lila will understand," she replied, her tone devoid of any warmth. "She'll grow up and realize I did this for myself." Nathan felt something inside him snap. He stepped closer to her, his voice low but shaking with anger. "For yourself? You're destroying this family for your so-called happiness? Have you forgotten everything we've built together?" Madeline didn't respond. She walked past him, picking up her handbag from the bed. Standing at the doorway, she looked at him one last time. "The divorce papers are on the kitchen table. I've already signed them. You just need to do the same. I'm not coming back." And with that, she was gone, leaving Nathan standing alone in the room that had once been filled with warmth, love, and shared dreams. Now it was nothing but a hollow shell. The house was deathly quiet, save for the faint, rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall, a haunting reminder that time would continue to move forward even as his world crumbled around him. Nathan sat silently in the living room, his hands trembling as he clutched the wedding ring Madeline had left behind. Memories of their life together flooded his mind, each one more vivid and painful than the last. He saw her smile in that simple white dress the day they met at a small cafe, her laughter echoing in his ears as they shared their dreams. They had once loved each other fiercely, lived for each other, and chased the same hopes. But now, all that remained were ashes, and Nathan couldn't fathom how it had all burned away. Their early years of marriage had been hard. Nathan had worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, while Madeline meticulously saved every penny to support his dream of becoming an author. She had been the first to read his financial guidebook drafts, cheering him on even when publishers turned him down again and again. They had been an unbreakable team, standing shoulder to shoulder against life's challenges. But then came his success. Nathan's books became bestsellers, and with them came a whirlwind of work, obligations, and distractions. He had poured all his energy into his career, convinced he was building a future for their family. He hadn't noticed the nights Madeline sat alone waiting for him to come home. He hadn't seen the disappointment in her eyes when he canceled yet another dinner or ignored her pleas for a weekend away. Her silence, once filled with patience, had grown into a chasm between them, but he hadn't realized it until now. And now, as he sat alone in the silence, Nathan finally understood. He had lost her long before tonight, long before James Monroe. But knowing this didn't ease the ache in his chest, it only made it worse. Yet everything began to change when Nathan found success. His first book became a sensation, and one contract after another pulled him into a relentless cycle of work and obligations. He threw himself into his career, believing he was doing everything necessary to secure a better future for his family. He didn't realize that every extra hour, every late night was a step further away from the woman he once loved more than anything. Madeline had tried to hold on to him, but Nathan had always brushed her off. He could vividly recall the nights when she would sit in the living room, waiting for him, her eyes brimming with hope, only to be met with a distracted nod before he buried himself in his laptop. He remembered the times she suggested taking a vacation together, but he always used work as an excuse to decline. Her complaints grew fewer and fewer until they stopped altogether. At the time, Nathan hadn't thought much of it. He assumed her silence was acceptance, never realizing it was actually her final warning. And then, things began to shift, slowly, almost imperceptibly. Madeline stopped asking him about work, stopped waiting for him to come home. She spent more and more time out of the house, citing dinner parties with friends or involvement in charity projects Nathan knew little about. Once, when he casually asked her about her plans, she had simply given him a vague smile and said, "Don't worry. I'm doing something that makes me feel alive again." Nathan hadn't realized how much weight those words carried. He had nodded absent-mindedly, thinking she'd finally found something to make her happy, while he remained immersed in his work. The biggest change came when she started mentioning a new name in her conversations, James Monroe. He was a younger colleague at the charity she had joined. At first, the name seemed inconsequential, just another person in her circle. But gradually, Nathan noticed that she mentioned James more often, her voice carrying a subtle excitement he hadn't heard in years. The first time Nathan truly felt the sting of doubt was on their 20th wedding anniversary. He had planned a romantic dinner at the restaurant they had visited on their honeymoon, reserving a window seat and ordering a bouquet of vibrant red roses to wait for her at the table. But Madeline never showed up. Instead, she sent a short text. "Sorry, something came up at work. Can we reschedule?" The message disappointed him, but he convinced himself it was a one-time thing. He didn't know that, while he sat alone with the roses, Madeline wasn't at the office. She was dining at another restaurant with James. Those memories now consumed Nathan like a bottomless pit of despair, pulling him deeper with every thought. He couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when everything had gone off track. Was it his fault for being so consumed by work? Or was it Madeline's fault for not telling him she was losing faith in their love? No answer brought him any comfort. Nathan looked down at the wedding ring in his hand. remembering the day he had placed it on Madeline's finger, vowing to love and protect her always. But now, those vows felt hollow. Madeline was gone, and the woman he had once adored with all his heart had become a stranger. His chest ached as he confronted the undeniable truth. Their marriage wasn't just fractured, it was shattered beyond repair. The next morning, Nathan woke after a restless night, the faint morning light seeping through the curtains and casting a cold pall over the room. He could feel the emptiness in the house as much as he could see it. Madeline no longer greeted him with her warm smile, no longer joined him at the breakfast table. What had once been a home filled with laughter and shared moments now felt like a hollow shell, every sound he made echoing back like a reminder of what had been lost. That evening, Nathan came home later than usual, the endless meetings and work commitments making him lose track of time. When he stepped inside, the silence felt heavier than it had ever been. The dim light in the living room was on, but there was no sign of Madeline. Placing his briefcase on the table, he walked into the kitchen and froze. On the dining table was an opened bottle of wine, nearly half empty. Beside it sat a single glass, untouched, as if it had been poured and abandoned mid-thought. Next to the glass lay Madeline's phone, its screen still illuminated with a message. Nathan's heart raced as he leaned closer to read it. "Are you home yet? I miss you." The sender, James Monroe. Nathan's chest tightened, his pulse pounding in his ears. He reached for the phone, his fingers brushing the edge, when her voice startled him from behind. "What are you doing?" Nathan turned to see Madeline standing in the doorway, her eyes flashing a mix of defiance and something else. Panic, perhaps. She was dressed in a red dress he had never seen before, her makeup carefully done, her hair swept into an elegant bun. She was breathtaking, but not for him. Not tonight. "Madeline," he said, his voice strained. "Whose message is this?" She stepped forward and took the phone from the table, her movements deliberate and unapologetic. "That's none of your business, Nathan," she said, her voice sharp and unwavering. "None of my business?" he echoed, his voice trembling with disbelief. "I'm your husband, Madeline. Who is James Monroe?" Madeline didn't answer immediately. Instead, she held his gaze for a moment before breaking it, her lips pressed tightly together. And in that silence, Nathan understood more than he wanted to. "Madeline," Nathan said, his voice trembling. "Who sent this message?" She stepped forward, taking the phone from his hand. "That's none of your business, Nathan." Her tone was sharp, cutting into him like a blade. "None of my business?" Nathan's brow furrowed as he fought to keep his emotions in check. "I'm your husband, Madeline. Who is this? James Monroe, isn't it?" Madeline remained silent, her eyes avoiding his. She didn't answer, but the silence said more than words ever could. Nathan felt as though the ground beneath him was shifting, as if he were teetering on the edge of a chasm he didn't know how to escape. "Madeline, what are you doing?" He took a step closer, his voice more urgent now. "What are you hiding from me?" At last, Madeline lifted her head, her eyes meeting his with a sharpness that stung. "Nathan, I'm tired," she said, her tone dripping with indifference. "I can't live like this anymore. I can't stay in a marriage that makes me feel like I'm dying inside." "Dying inside?" Nathan echoed, disbelief thick in his voice. "We've been through so much together, Madeline. I know it hasn't always been easy, but we've always made it through. Why now? Why like this?" "Because you're not here anymore, Nathan." Madeline's voice cracked as she shouted, her frustration spilling over. "You're always buried in your work, in your meetings, in your writing. Do you ever actually see me? Do you ever ask me how I feel, what I want? You think bringing home a paycheck is enough? I don't need a wallet, Nathan, I need a man." Her words hit Nathan like a punch to the gut. He stood there, unable to form a response. Deep down, he knew she wasn't wrong. He had neglected her, let his work consume the time and attention that should have gone to her. but he couldn't believe it had come to this. "And James is that man, isn't he?" he asked, his voice low but thick with emotion. "He's the man you need?" Madeline looked at him, her gaze void of any guilt. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady. "He makes me feel alive. He makes me feel like I matter." Nathan felt something inside him shatter. He couldn't bring himself to say another word, only watching as Madeline stepped past him, the hem of her red dress brushing the floor like an unspoken farewell. Before she reached the door, she turned back, her voice no longer cold but tinged with exhaustion. "I'll be late tonight, don't wait up." The door closed behind her, leaving Nathan alone in a house he no longer recognized. In that moment, he understood that everything had changed forever. Madeline was no longer the woman he had loved, and their marriage had crossed a line from which it could never return. Nathan stepped into the grand ballroom of the Grand Windsor Hotel, where the charity gala was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers cast a dazzling glow over the room, laughter and the clinking of glasses echoing from the elegantly dressed crowd. But Nathan noticed none of it. His eyes were locked on one man, James Monroe. James stood in the far corner of the room, radiating confidence, his charming smile firmly in place as he entertained a group of potential donors. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, blending seamlessly into the crowd like a shark circling its prey, each word he spoke carefully calculated to reel them in. Beside him, Madeline clung to his arm, her laughter soft, her gaze admiring. She looked at James the way she used to look at Nathan, oblivious to the fact that just a few steps behind her, Nathan was watching it all unfold. Nathan gripped his glass of wine tightly, his knuckles white with the effort of holding back his anger and disappointment. He no longer recognized the woman who had once meant everything to him. But this wasn't just about Madeline anymore. This was about James, the man who had wormed his way into Nathan's life and taken everything. Tonight, Nathan would expose him for what he truly was, a fraud. And this time, Nathan wasn't alone. Claire Morrison stood a few paces behind him, her gaze fixed firmly on James. In her hands was a thick folder filled with undeniable evidence of James's scams and schemes. She stepped closer to Nathan, her voice low but resolute. "Are you ready? Everything we need is right here. If you want to take him down, this is the moment." Nathan nodded, but before he could move, James spotted him. For a fleeting second, surprise flickered across his face, but it was quickly replaced by his trademark smug smile. He left the group he had been entertaining, weaving through the crowd with the predatory grace of a hunter closing in on his prey. "Well, Nathan," James said smoothly as he approached, his tone oozing condescension, "what brings you here? This event is for people who contribute, you know. I didn't think you'd be on the guest list." Nathan returned his smile with a calmness that masked the storm brewing inside him. "Oh, I'm here for you, James. And to make sure everyone here knows exactly who you really are." James raised an eyebrow, feigning confusion. "I'm not sure I follow." At that moment, Claire stepped forward, placing the folder on the nearest table. "I think you understand perfectly," she said, her voice sharp and deliberate. "This file contains everything we've gathered about you, James, from your financial scams to your manipulation of wealthy women and how you used Madeline to get closer to Nathan's assets." James turned to Claire, his smile faltering but still clinging to his facade. "And who might you be? Just another bitter lawyer trying to meddle in things she doesn't understand?" Claire smirked, sliding the folder closer to him. "This isn't meddling. This is the truth. And I've already sent copies to the people who need to see it. The police, your past victims, and every major donor in this room. Did you really think you could keep running forever, James?" "Nathan," James said, his voice smooth yet laced with provocation. "What are you doing here? This event is for people who actually contribute. I don't think you're on the guest list." Nathan smirked faintly, though his gaze never wavered from James. "Oh, I'm here for you, James. And to make sure everyone in this room knows exactly who you really are." James raised an eyebrow, still maintaining his composure. "I have no idea what you're talking about." At that moment, Claire stepped forward, placing a thick file on the table nearby. "I think you know exactly what he means," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "This file contains everything we've uncovered about you, James, from financial fraud and manipulating wealthy women to using Madeline to gain access to Nathan's assets." James turned to Claire, a faint, mocking smile curling at his lips. "And who are you? A small-time lawyer thinking you can threaten me?" Claire chuckled, pushing the file toward him. "This isn't a threat, it's the truth. And I've already sent copies to those who need to see it. The police, your previous victims, and every major donor in this room. Do you really think you can keep running, James?" The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. Guests nearby began to take notice, their whispers spreading like wildfire, and soon all eyes were on James. Though he maintained a facade of confidence, a flicker of panic darted through his eyes. He turned to Madeline, desperately seeking her support. "Madeline, you don't believe this nonsense, do you?" he said, his voice tinged with desperation. "They're just trying to divide us. Nathan's always been jealous of me, and Claire is just a bitter lawyer who doesn't know what she's doing." Madeline hesitated, her gaze shifting between Nathan and James, confusion etched across her face as if trying to piece together what was really happening. But before she could speak, Nathan stepped forward, his voice calm yet commanding. "Madeline, open your eyes," he said firmly. "James doesn't love you. He's only using you to get what he wants. Do you think it's a coincidence that he showed up in your life the moment he realized I was successful? That he pushed you away from me, encouraged you to demand money and assets? Can't you see? He's nothing but a first-class con artist." Madeline took a step back, her face pale as the weight of Nathan's words sank in. She turned to James, her expression shifting from confusion to fury. "James, you lied to me? Everything we had? It was all fake?" James clenched his jaw, unable to muster a response. But Nathan didn't need him to. He glanced at Claire, giving her a slight nod. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small USB drive, holding it up for everyone to see. "This," Claire announced, her voice carrying across the room, "is everything you need to know about James Monroe's illegal activities. And I think everyone here will be interested in seeing it. Hotel security has also been notified. The police are on their way." James's composure finally cracked. He spun on his heel, attempting to leave, but two security guards were already stationed at the doors. One stepped forward, placing a firm hand on James's shoulder. "Mr. Monroe, we need you to stay here." Nathan watched as James was escorted out, a wave of relief washing over him. For the first time in months, he felt a weight lifting from his chest, a burden he hadn't realized was so heavy. He turned to face Madeline, who stood frozen, her expression one of deep regret. But she didn't say a word. Instead, she lowered her gaze and quietly slipped out of the room. Nathan stood in place for a moment, exhaling deeply. Then he turned to Claire, the woman who had stood by him through everything. She smiled softly, her eyes filled with pride. "It's over," she said gently. "You've won." Nathan nodded, a quiet sense of peace settling over him. His life was finally moving forward. No more James, no more betrayal, just hope and a new beginning. The first rays of morning sunlight streamed through the living room window of Nathan's home, casting a golden glow over the space. He stood by the window, looking out at the small garden where Lila was laughing brightly, chasing after a tiny dog Claire had brought as a gift. The dark days seemed like a distant memory now. A sense of peace crept into his chest, as if he had weathered a storm and could finally bask in the sunlight. From the kitchen, Claire's laughter rang out as she struggled with the coffee machine. Nathan stepped inside to see her wrestling with a stuck button. He chuckled, walking over to gently nudge her aside. "Let me handle it," he said, his tone tinged with humor. Claire raised an eyebrow, smirking playfully. "Be my guest, but if you spill, you're cleaning it up." The coffee machine let out a loud sputter before finally springing to life. Nathan poured 2 cups, setting one down in front of Claire as she took a seat at the table. She looked at him through the rising steam, her eyes warm and filled with an understanding he had never seen in anyone else. "You okay?" she asked softly. Nathan paused, his hands cradling the warm mug. "I am," he said, the words feeling genuine for the first time in a long while. "I really am." Claire smiled, a small but knowing expression. She had witnessed Nathan's journey, the pain, the doubts, the struggle to let go of his guilt and anger. But more than that, she had seen him rebuild himself, piece by piece, into the man he wanted to be. And now, sitting across from him, she knew he was finally ready to move forward. The sunlight filtered through the window, illuminating the room, and Nathan felt it deep in his heart. The storm had passed, and brighter days lay ahead. Nathan paused for a moment, his hands gently turning the coffee mug in his grip. "I'm okay," he replied, feeling the truth of those words for the first time. "Truly okay. I think I've finally made it through." Claire smiled, her eyes conveying that she believed it too. Over the past few months, she had watched Nathan painstakingly rebuild himself, from confronting Madeline to working through the guilt of believing he hadn't done enough to save his marriage. Claire had been more than just a legal ally. She had become his companion on this difficult journey. Madeline had now disappeared from both Nathan's and Lila's lives. She left the city, carrying with her the weight of regret for the mistakes she had made. The last time Nathan saw her was at their divorce hearing. She hadn't said a word, simply signed the papers and walked away in silence. Yet Nathan had forgiven her. Not because she deserved it, but because he knew that forgiveness was the only way he could move forward. Nathan's life was simpler now, but it was also far happier. He spent more time with Lila, taking her on picnics, attending her school concerts, and even learning how to bake just to see her laugh. Claire had become an inseparable part of their lives, not just as a friend, but as a woman Nathan could trust, love, and lean on. One evening, as the three of them sat together in the living room, Lila suddenly asked, "Dad, are you happy?" The question caught Nathan off guard, but he quickly smiled. "I'm very happy, Lila, because I have you, and I have Claire," he said, glancing at Claire with a gaze full of affection. Claire laughed softly, trying to hide the blush creeping up her cheeks. But Lila wasn't done. "So, are you two going to get married or what?" she asked, her eyes twinkling mischievously. Nathan and Claire looked at each other, both momentarily speechless. Then Nathan stood, walked over to Claire, and took her hand. "I think Lila just gave us a pretty great idea," he said, his voice warm and steady. Claire stared at him, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and joy. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Absolutely," he said. "You've always been here, helping me stand back up when I thought I couldn't. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever: hope, love, and a family. So, Claire, I think it's time I do this." He knelt down and pulled a small box from his pocket, one he had been carrying for some time. "Will you marry me?" Claire covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. She nodded, unable to speak, and Nathan stood, pulling her into his arms as Lila cheered excitedly in the background. Life wasn't perfect, but Nathan had found himself again, surrounded by the people he loved most. His journey of healing wasn't just about letting go of the pain, it was about learning to live better because of it. And as the evening light faded into the horizon, Nathan knew he was ready for a new chapter in his life, a chapter filled with hope, love, and peace.